And Lara Afolayan is joining us now for more on that report. Hello, Lara. First off, talk to us about the antimicrobial issue and its effect on agriculture.
Okay, antibiotics resistance is when bacteria develop resistance to antibiotics. But antimicrobial resistance is actually a bigger spectrum. It actually encompasses antibiotic resistance. It is when virus, bacteria, and even microbes develop resistance to antibiotics. And what scientists are saying is that to curtail this trend in Nigeria and in other countries around the world, people need to stop abusing the use of antibiotics. They also say that in agriculture, some farmers apply antibiotics on their farmlands for improved produce, and this in turn gets into the crops. And when those crops are harvested and humans consume those crops, those antibiotics begin to reside in humans. And humans indirectly now develop resistance to antibiotics. And even not just antibiotics, humans through antimicrobial resistance could develop resistance to drugs like antiretrovirals, for example, that are used for managing HIV. And they also say that for livestock, some livestock farmers use antibiotics for their livestock, and those animals, because those antibiotics are misused, they are not used with the prescription of a vet doctor, for example, the animals now develop resistance to antibiotics through the use of those drugs, and the livestock now begin to die. Because even when other drugs are being used for them, other drugs even beyond antibiotics are used for livestock, those drugs do not work. And in the process, the country is losing so much to livestock, losing so much in livestock farming as a result of the wrong use of antibiotics. And they also say that it's not even just through crops that humans can develop antimicrobial resistance, that even from consuming livestock, for example, for consuming cattle, for example, that antibiotics has been used for, you could develop antimicrobial resistance. And so the FAO, the World Health Organization, and the International Organization for Animal Health have come together in line with a UN endorsement of a global action plan in the fight against antimicrobial resistance several years ago. They're coming together to build the capacity of African countries like Nigeria to fight the antimicrobial surge in the country. Because according to data, by the year 2050, millions of African lives would have been lost to antimicrobial resistance if nothing urgent is done about it.
And since we understand it's a global phenomenon, it's not just something that is happening in Nigeria or being abused by farmers in the country alone. What has been done by the government over time up until now to ensure that it's reduced to the barest minimum?
Okay, with the help of the World Health Organization, Nigeria conducted an assessment of how much antimicrobial resistance has eaten deep into the Nigerian system, and the country also developed a national action plan from the year 2017 to the year 2022. It basically has to do with empowering the country in terms of improving infrastructure in our laboratories, surveillance efforts, and also creating awareness. But from what the World Health Organization said today, Nigeria has not achieved much as regards the implementation of that particular action plan. And even though that plan still has like 3 years before it ends, they're saying that Nigeria needs to develop more political will in the fight against antimicrobial resistance, that the situation is far worse than we think it is. And the Nigerian authorities were at that meeting earlier today. We had the representative of the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, the permanent secretary was there, and he was saying that the recommendations from that meeting would be looked at by the Nigerian government to further strengthen the fight against antimicrobial resistance in the country.
And in essence now, what strategies were suggested to the government, government officials present in moving forward in order to achieve a lot within the next 3 years?
Basically, the major strategy that was suggested to the different governments at that meeting was the need to create awareness. The farmers need to be educated on not to abuse antibiotics on their farms. The livestock farmer needs to be educated on how not to abuse the use of antibiotics in applying them for livestock health. And we humans, we Nigerians, also need to learn not to abuse antibiotics. Do not use do not use antibiotics without doctor's prescription, because the far-reaching impact of antimicrobial resistance is far more dangerous than we think it is. Basically, the underlying recommendation to all those present at that event was the need to create awareness that people need to learn to do the right thing. Do not abuse drugs, particularly antibiotics.
Lara Afolayan, TVC News correspondent there, she just told us about the need to avoid antibiotics abuse in order to avoid the fight against antimicrobial resistance gaining momentum.